All right, how's everybody doing today? Same as always, I see. Okay, so yes, Friday, I got sick, started losing my voice Sunday, and then of course Monday and Tuesday, just lecture. By the time I got around to lunchtime yesterday, I was talking like this. It was bad. I almost thought I was gonna have to cancel class today, but I went to sleep early. I drank so much tea. I don't think a person should drink as much tea as I have drank in the last 24 hours, but it has worked. I've got some of my voice back. So we're gonna push through today and we'll get through this and then we'll talk about your assignment afterwards. Couple of things, housekeeping notes. Number one, you have your scavenger hunt that you still need to turn in. Please get that to me. If you have your 3 goals on Canvas, because I had set up Canvas to allow for either turn in physically or turn in digitally. If you turned your assignment in physically to me, Canvas is going to notify you that you haven't done anything yet. Ignore it, okay? Because it's not true. You have turned yours in. Now, I'm finishing up all the comments for those 3 goals this week. So sometime probably tomorrow or no later than Friday, once I get all the comments done, I'll put them into Canvas. You'll get a grade for that. If you turn it in, you're gonna get 100. But you'll get comments from me. Some of your goals, as I was reading through them, they sound great. Some, the goals that you picked, may not have hit all 5 points. If you remember the SMART acronym, they have to be specific, measurable, they have to be achievable, right? They have to be related to education. There were a couple of goals there that I think you guys need to tweak. And then it had to have some sort of time component. So you may get a comment from me, it's like, these are great goals, but you don't have a mechanism to measure that goal. So you may have said, hey, I wanna do well, fill in the blank, but you don't define what well means. It's like, well, tell me what that means. So there may be comments from me that ask you to kind of tweak your goal just a bit, so you kind of add to it, make it a little bit more specific. There were some goals that weren't related to education. So like I had one person who was just like, I want to lose weight. I'm like, that's a fantastic goal. I am on that bandwagon too, but how does that relate to your education? Okay, so those are the kind of comments. But for the vast majority of them, they look fantastic. I really appreciate them. Once I get all those comments done, you'll get a notification from Canvas on that. But today, I'm going to give you guys actually 2 assignments, but don't freak out. One assignment we're going to talk about here in a couple of minutes is going to be due next week. The other one, you have a couple of weeks to complete, okay? So what we need to do is we need to kind of wrap up this discussion that we were having about time management and motivation. So last week we were talking about internal motivation and external motivation. Does everybody remember that vaguely? I know it's been a week, so you probably forgot everything we talked about up to this point, but internal motivation and external motivation, as we were discussing this, as it relates to your education, I basically ended on this slide. It's a complicated matter, right? The idea is kind of trying to find and strike a balance between internal motivators and external motivators, because if you just rely on external motivators, those aren't enough typically to sustain you long term. And internal motivators, while they can sustain you long term, they can burn you out very, very quickly. So we want to make sure that we have a good balance between these two. Now, on top of that, we mentioned several different techniques and strategies for time management. One of those I mentioned was a to-do list. Does everybody remember when I was talking about a daily to-do list? So a daily to-do list, while that is a really good resource and a good strategy for a lot of people, having a daily to-do list itself may not be feasible for a lot of people or may not work with the way that they actually organize things. However, keeping a schedule or at least keeping a list of things that you need to be aware of that is coming up in the future is a very good idea. So with that in mind, I want to talk about prioritizing a to-do list. And this doesn't necessarily need to be a to-do list, this just could be a schedule. So first and foremost, make sure that any of your assignments or non-academic obligations are prioritized first. So in other words, the things that you need to put on your schedule need to be things like your work schedule, right? Your class schedule, the things where you need to be, the obligations that you need to be. Not a lot of people in here have families already, like they don't have kids, but if you do have kids, obviously, picking your kids up from school, that's a non-academic obligation. You need to know what those obligations are. In addition to that, when it comes to things that are important in class, when the assignments are due, tests are set up, quizzes are set up, you need to have those as well. And last week, I mentioned to you that if you go on my TCC track, there's a button to click where you can actually import your entire class schedule into your calendar app. You can do the same thing on Canvas. You can actually subscribe to your calendar on Canvas, and all of your assignments and due dates will show up on your calendar app. Now, what this allows you to do is this allows you, when you take a look at your schedule, it allows you to see all the things that you are expected to do at the times you're expected to do them. Because remember, time management is not about scheduling the time where you need to do the things that you're expected to do. It's about scheduling the time where you're not expected to do something, your quote, free time, right? But in order for you to get to that point, you need to start here. If you've got a big project or a big assignment, let's say you have an essay, okay? Can we agree? You're not gonna get into a class and a professor's gonna be like, all right, each and every one of you need to have a 5-page research paper written in the next 48 hours, right? Is anybody expecting you to write a 5-page research paper in 2 days? No. If you're gonna get that assignment, it's usually a couple of weeks from now is when it's due. Agreed? However, how many times in your schooling have you ever had a project like that where you had several weeks to complete it, but maybe you got a little paralyzed looking at the overall project and you didn't really get started, and then you kind of procrastinated, and then by the time you started working on it, then you really did only have a couple of days to do the work. You know what I'm talking about? When you end up with a big project or an assignment that's given to you by your professor, one of the things you want to do is start every week by looking ahead and going, okay, what do I need to get done? I would do this, like, say, on a Sunday night before your week gets started. And let's say I've got that research paper. Well, what I would put on my schedule or my long-term to-do list, I would say, okay, what do I need to get done this week? What can I do just to get started this week? So if I've got a 5-page paper due in the next 3 weeks, I may go, okay, for the first couple of days of my week, maybe I'll start with an outline, just a simple outline, just organize my thoughts on what the paper is going to be about. By the end of the week, I will have written a rough draft of my first paragraph, my thesis statement for my paper. Does everybody see that? I'm breaking it up in small chunks. By the second week, I will have the first 2 pages, the rough draft of the first 2 pages done. By the start of the third week, I'll have my next couple of pages done on my rough draft, so I have time to edit it and get it turned in on time. The idea is to break up the big things into smaller bite-sized chunks so that you're not standing there looking at the end going, oh my gosh, I got 5 whole pages I need to write, and become paralyzed by that. But instead, schedule the smaller things so you can just take one step forward to be able to get to that goal. Does that make sense? And you could do that in your schedule or your to-do list. Again, any exams or quizzes that are coming up, how many people, just out of curiosity, after what we talked about last week, how many people actually began utilizing their calendar app on their phone for things? Okay. How many people have ever added exams in their calendar app that are coming up? How many people just try to remember when exams are going to be done? Yeah, most people are doing that way. Here's a tip. Again, not all these tips work for everybody, but if you're the type of person who just tries to remember when exams are going to come up and you find yourself forgetting until like the day or 2 before the exam, or worse yet, the morning of, and then realize, oh shoot, I need to study. Put the date of the exam in your calendar app and use the alert feature in the calendar app. Set up an alert for like a week before the exam, and then set up a second alert 3 days before the exam. That way it prompts you, your phone notifies you and says, hey, you have an exam in 72 hours. Have you studied yet? Okay? One way that you can do this. And again, if you're doing this on a to-do list, if I'm setting up a list on Sunday, then I want to look ahead and go, okay, I may not have an exam this week, but maybe I have an exam the next week. So on my to-do list, I'm going to put studying for that exam. So that when I do take a look at my overall calendar, I know, okay, I got a couple hours between this class, I've got a couple of hours here. I'm going to spend that time, I'm going to schedule for that time for me to study for that exam. Does that make sense? All right, next. I know for many of us, weekends and holidays are the little moments of joy in our schedule, right? It's the time where we don't get to do anything. However, how many people here have to work on weekends? See, now suddenly weekends aren't necessarily that little respite of joy, is it? How about holidays? Anybody here who have to work holidays? Yeah, anybody have to work Black Friday? I always hated working Black Friday. It seems worse now than back when I used to work Black Fridays. Those were bad days. Those were a long time ago. For a lot of people who don't have to work on weekends or don't have to work on holidays, you view that time as like, it's me time. I get to do whatever I want. I don't want to have to worry about or even think about school. And I get that. However, now that you're in college, again, everybody's goal is different. Now that you're in college, you're here for a specific reason. You're not here because we've told you from K through 12, you need to be in a school, right? You're not being forced to be here. Each and every one of you has a specific goal in mind for your own future success. So, the free time that you have on the weekends and the holidays, sometimes you got to sacrifice a couple of hours, sometimes an entire day, because you've got to work on something to complete for class. You got to study. You got to work on that project. You got to catch up and read a couple of chapters in your book. The point is this. As we discussed in the first week of class, you need to take responsibility for your own learning. And one area that a lot of students neglect or overlook are weekends and holidays. I know that sounds terrible. It's like, man, that's my weekend and that's my holiday. You mean I have to do work during that? Not all the time. But don't view that as a complete and total off limits when it comes to having to complete things for school. View it as an opportunity. I have time there. If I need to use that time, I'm going to be able to schedule time to be able to get that done. Now remember, some of you are only going to be in school a year if you're getting a certificate, 2 years if you're getting an associate's, 4 if you decide you're going to transfer for a bachelor's degree, or maybe even longer. And for some of you, 4 to 6 years sounds like a long period of time, but it's really not in the grand scheme of things. If you really think about it, the number of hours, if you spend 2 hours here or 3 hours here on the weekend, or 2 hours here or 3 hours here on Thanksgiving, or whatever holiday, I just picked Thanksgiving because that's what's coming up. The amount of time that you put in there for those 4 or 6 years that you're in school is a small price to pay if it leads to greater success for you and for you to be able to get to your goal. So, weekends and holidays should not be off limits when it comes to studying. And again, one of the things we talked about, the schedule that you have in college is vastly different than it is in high school. How many people here have hours between classes? Yeah, right? And I don't mean like from day to day. I'm talking like in the same day. I've got a situation where like on a, let's just say Monday, I have 4 hours between the end of when I teach one class and before I start teaching my night class. 4 hours. Does that mean I just run back to my office and veg out watching YouTube videos for 4 hours? No. But how many times have you found yourself, it didn't have to be 4 hours, maybe it's just 1 hour, right? Maybe it's 45 minutes. How many times have you found yourself with that sort of break in your schedule, and you don't do anything productive during that time. You're not actively thinking about how you can use that time to help you out with things that you need to do in class. And you just get to that moment and just be like, well, I got 45 minutes. I'm just going to sit here and dead scroll through insert social media network here. Instead of, you know what? If I've got the time and if I look at my schedule, I've got a project that needs to be done that's coming up. I've got an exam that's coming up that I need to study for. There's an assignment that I need to work on. Perfect time to schedule to do that kind of thing. Now, what I am not saying is that you need to fill every minute of your day with school-based tasks. It's not what I'm saying. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But what I am saying is change your perspective of what your time means to you. Change your perspective of what you would consider to be free time and view it as an opportunistic time for you to be able to get this stuff done. And it is all about finding a balance. Okay? Because again, all work and no play, right? You don't want to burn yourself out that way either. But here's what you're going to do. And I start with this bullet point. Always start with academics because y'all are students right now. Again, some of you probably have full-time jobs and you're full-time students, right? And bless you, I know that's a difficult schedule. But there are several of you don't have a full-time job. Being in school is your full-time job. It's your only job. You come to campus, you come to class, you leave campus, you go home, you repeat the next day. That's your total sum of your schedule, okay? Fantastic, I applaud you. But the reason why I'm saying start with academics is because each and every one of you are here as full-time students to study academics. If I was giving this same speech on time management to a bunch of career individuals, academics obviously wouldn't play a part in this. So I don't want you to think that I'm saying, don't pay attention to my family, don't pay attention to my friends, don't pay attention to the things that I love doing. I'm just pointing out, always start with academics when you're talking about scheduling your time. Because this is where you want to be. This is your priority. At least I'm assuming that's your priority because you're here. Because this is your priority for the next couple of years, put that first, okay? And when you do that, your schedule that you have, as we talked about, going through the things, making sure that you put the schedule when you're supposed to be in class, schedule of when you have exams and assignments due, that schedule will help you to figure out how you can manage your time when you're not expected to do those things. That also means that, guess what? You may have to decide between going out and doing things that you want to do versus staying behind and doing things that you need to do. Which leads me to, of course, the all work and no play point. Anybody ever seen the Stephen King movie, The Shining? Jack Nicholson, right? Famous scene, sitting at his typewriter. That tells you it's an old movie. And he's typing out, and his wife finds it. It says, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Okay, now, famous scene, but it's true. If all you do and your entire life is just consumed by worrying about academics all the time, and you do not make time to get out of that mindset every now and then and kind of rejuvenate yourself, you can burn yourself out pretty quickly. And that's true for anything. I would say the same thing to people who are working in industry. If all you are doing is totally consuming yourself with work-related things, you bring your work home all the time, you think about work when you're out with family, you think about every aspect of your life is wrapped up in work, you're going to burn yourself out. So, I am not telling you that your entire life needs to be 100% consumed by academics. What I am saying, though, is that you got to be smart about your time. You can't allow the things that you want to do, right, to interfere or allow you to procrastinate on things that you need to do. Do you understand the distinction? So when I say that time management is about the time where you're not expected to be somewhere, the things that we're talking about, placing your academics first, in your schedule, making sure that when it comes to things like your class time and your assignments are there, when you do get to a point where it's like, okay, I've got 4 hours here, right? You can look at it and go, well, you know what? I'm kind of caught up with all of my work. Now's a good time for me to catch up on insert video game here, right? Or check up on my favorite creator on YouTube. Or dead scroll through TikTok. Whatever the case may be. Okay? But you've got to prioritize things the right way. The wants are going to have to wait. You're going to have a little bit of self-control and delayed gratification in those areas. And that's a difficult thing for people to do. So I challenge you, for 1 week, try doing this, right? Focus on what do I need to do academically first. Schedule the things that you need to do to get it out of the way before you start thinking about how you're going to utilize your free time to do the things you want. Okay? However, I do want to point this out. You got to be flexible. Has anybody had a day where you woke up in the morning and you're like, I know exactly what I'm going to do today. I got my whole day planned out. And then something happens, completely derails your day. Ever had that happen to you before? You know what I'm talking about? Okay? How do you take that? Does it make you angry? Just kind of roll with it? How many people get frustrated when that happens to you? More than a few people are nodding up and down. Yeah, here's the thing. It's going to happen, right? One of my favorite quotes was actually given to me by my business partner. He said, life is what happens when you're busy making plans. Right? Life is what happens when you're busy making plans. I love that quote. It's true, right? You could plan everything out to a T and then car breaks down, right? Or you get sick, you lose your voice. Any number of things can happen. When that does happen, you got to be flexible. But here's the thing. If you're the type of person who just rolls through life and you will just do things when the moment kind of comes up or when you just kind of feel or like getting around to it and you're not keeping things on a schedule, when life does happen to you, you may find that you no longer have time to get the things done that you need to get done. Can't tell you how many students I've had. It's like, yeah, I've had this long project that I've had to work on. I've had 2 weeks to give you to work on this project. And they waited and waited and waited to start because they thought, I'll have plenty of time if I start it next week. This week, I got other things I want to do. I got a hockey game I want to go to, or a concert with friends I want to go to, or I just need some me time. Fine. Then that next week starts. The week that they've got all this time to do the project, and suddenly water pipe bursts in their house, destroys their computer. That actually happened to a student one time. Suddenly now, they didn't have the time they thought they did. They would have been able to finish the project had they started it the previous week. But now they're sitting there, they only have 48 hours to finish a big project, and they can't get it done, and they have to turn in an incomplete project, and their grade suffers. That's just one example. I can give you many. But my point is you got to be flexible when life hits you, because it is going to hit you. But that also means that you got to be smart with the time that you do have. Don't expect that, hey, I've got this 4-hour chunk in the middle of the day. I know exactly what I'm going to do. Because I'll tell you, it didn't happen to me on Monday. I thought on Monday, I got plenty of time to get this and this and this done. And what ended up happening, I got a phone call and I had to run down to an emergency meeting on Monday. Did I get any of the things done that I wanted to get done on Monday? Nope. Okay, it happens. And it will happen to you. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But be flexible, but be smart in the time that you do schedule. And of course, come back to your list periodically or your schedule periodically and check it. Make sure everything is right. Add to it, tweak it, whatever you need to do. Okay? Any questions about this? All right, so let's talk about your first assignment. We've already talked about your 3 goals. Each and every one of you have done your 3 goals. You have done what I would consider to be a rough draft of your 3 goals. And outside of the comments that will be posted to Canvas later this week, your 3 goals are ready to move on to the next phase. And what we're going to do is we're going to change your SMART goals to SMARTer goals. I didn't come up with this acronym. But I already mentioned what SMART means, but the E and the R means to evaluate and revise. So I will be giving you comments that may ask you to revise your goals, maybe because it didn't hit on one of the original 5 points. That's fine. However, we're going to add to this. In addition to tweaking your goals that you already have, if you need to tweak them, I want you to also think about those goals and tell me 2 things. Number 1, is it a short-term goal or is it a long-term goal? Then I want you to tell me, what is your motivation behind that goal? Why is that goal important to you? I think I mentioned last week my business advisor asking me, why do you want to be a business major? Did I mention that in this class? So here's the thing. He was asking me for my motivation. Why are you motivated to get a business degree? My answer, of course, was to start a business. I want to know, what is your motivation? Is it an internal motivation or is it an external motivation? You don't have to label it as such. It could be 1 sentence. You know, my motivation for picking this goal is fill in the blank here. Okay? That will turn it into a SMARTer goal because I want you to think about this. And by the way, these goals are not written in stone. If you look back at your 3 goals, especially after everything we talked about the last couple of weeks, you're like, I don't like goal number 1 and 3. Rewrite them. Change them up. Throw them away and give me new goals. Right? None of them are written in stone. If you want to completely redo your 3 goals, be my guest. But they have to hit the proper acronym. They have to be SMART, meaning specific, measurable, they have to be achievable, relatable, and they have to be time-based. Okay? And then I need to know short-term, long-term, and what your motivation is. Now, when you turn this in on Canvas, you could do it like this, as like a table format. That's fine. Do a couple columns, right? So you say, well, here's my SMART goal, right? It's a short-term goal, and here's my motivation. See how easy that is? Now, of course, you'll probably want to do more than 1 on a page, so you can do that. You can turn it in digitally, so if you know how to kind of create a table or a column-based layout in, Word or something, be my guest. Or if you want to do it again on paper and turn it into me, you could do that as well. Okay? Any questions about this? All right, so that will go live before the end of the class on Canvas, along with all the slides from time management and motivation. Any questions? Good. All right, so this will be available online shortly. All right. So with that being said, let's just move on to our next topic, which is taking notes while I sip my tea. And hopefully regain some of my voice. There we go, that's a little better. How many people here take notes in every class that you go to? Okay. How many people take notes sometimes? It's almost everybody at this point. All right. How many people never take any notes because you remember everything perfectly all the time? Yeah, thought so. Okay. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the learning process. And there were 4 steps in the learning process. It started off preparing for class, right? Absorbing the information in the class. Does anybody remember what the 3rd step in the learning process was? Capture. Absolutely 100%. And then the 4th step was review. Capture is this, okay? Capture is taking notes. Now, here's the thing about note-taking. Note-taking should be very personalized. In other words, I cannot stand up here and tell everybody in here, if you take notes just like this, it'll be perfect. You'll be able to have the best notes. You'll be able to recall all the information. It'll help you in all of your classes 100% of the time. Can't do that. Because just like when we're talking about the learning process, we're talking about learning styles, learning types, right? Remember the acronym was VARK, visual, auditory, reading, and kinesthetic. Everybody is different in their learning style. Therefore, all of your note-taking should be different as well. Because in the end, who are your notes for? Are they for me? Are they for people around you? Who are they for?
Yourself.
Yeah, they're for yourself. So as we talk about this topic, I don't want you to get bogged down in, this particular strategy or that particular strategy. I want you to think about, okay, how do these strategies work and how might they help me in my particular learning style? Does that make sense? All right, so first thing I want to ask is this. How many people always take notes the old-fashioned way? Pen, paper, handwrite them. Okay. How many people take notes with like a cell phone? Anybody take notes with cell phones? All right. How about laptops or tablets? Okay. Including the people who are currently taking notes on laptops and tablets. All right. So first thing that I want to point out is a study that was done just a few years ago. It started right before COVID hit. And it was a study on digital distractions. So this study came out actually in April, it was published in April of 2020, a month right after everything shut down, right? Did you all enjoy COVID learning? I mean, not COVID itself, I mean the COVID learning process. Now, some of you liked it, some of you didn't. And I guarantee you the ones that liked it, it was probably because distance learning really activated your specific learning style. And for those of you who absolutely hated it, it's because it didn't. It didn't meet you where you learn. And that was a problem. But on top of that, this study that was done in 2020, actually started in 2019, what they were doing is that they were trying to determine, now that more and more students are using laptops and tablets in the classroom to take notes, how is that affecting their note-taking skills? And here's what they found out. The biggest problem is not that all students are doing this, but that a majority of students are being distracted by their digital devices. Here's what I mean by that. You have your laptop open and you're taking notes. However, what they found is the majority, again, not all, but the majority of the people that are doing that are not just taking notes. They're also listening to Spotify. They also have a web browser open and they're doing something in a web browser. They also have their email open. They're responding to emails. They have a text message app open. They're responding in text messages, or they're following a text thread in a group chat or something. In other words, they're multitasking. Okay? Which is a topic we'll deal with here in just a little bit. The problem with that is that they found that the students who were doing these things, their note-taking was below average. You think, I can do these things. You think you can multitask and take notes at the same time. The reality of the situation is you really can't. Okay? So, be thinking about that as we move on. But here are some tips to help you take better notes. Because it seems like everybody in here, at least some of the time, are taking notes. So how do we take better notes? The first step is you have to get in the right mindset. Here's what I mean by this. If you're the type of person, and again, you know you better than I do, but if you're the type of person who comes into the class, sits down a couple of minutes before class starts, pulls out your cell phone, and just starts flipping through, your mindset is in whatever you are doing at that moment. So that when the professor gets up here and goes, all right, so today we're going to be talking about, and then immediately starts getting into the lesson, there's a problem. The problem is this. Most people cannot quickly flip the switch and go from this to this. It takes them some time to get into it. Which means most students who are not getting in the right mindset before class. Remember, first step in the learning process is prepare for class. If you're not in the right mindset before class begins, the first couple of minutes of class, your notes are a mess or incomplete. They're not going to do you very good. So instead, switch it around. Before class starts, review what you talked about last class by reviewing your notes, reading ahead in the chapter, doing some of the things we talked about in the learning process lecture, right? Prepare for class. Get yourself in that mindset so that when the professor's like, all right, so today we're going to be talking about, you're already in that mindset of that subject material. Because I guarantee you, it's very difficult to sit here and flip through TikTok and then immediately flip the switch and start talking about ancient Greek mythology. Okay? It's like there aren't many people who can make that transition very quickly. So you've got to set the scene. One technique that may help, if it's not just reading ahead or reading your notes, ask yourself some big picture questions before the class begins. And here's what I mean by that. Ask yourself, okay, last week or last class, we talked about these topics. How is that going to fit in, or how does that fit in with previous lessons, or how does that currently fit in with me and what I am doing career-wise, right? In the field of study that I'm currently doing. Or how is what I am learning right now, how can I apply this to my life right now? Sometimes doing that kind of practical application exercise is enough to get somebody into that particular mindset very quickly. So these are two techniques that you can use to, quote, set the scene. Questions about those? All right, so this next one is one that I find that a lot of students either have never thought of doing or it just sounds ridiculous. And that is, view your lectures as a conversation. Does that sound weird? A lecture is a conversation? But why is that? What is a conversation? If I were to ask you to define a conversation, what would you tell me?
Talking between people.
Yeah, talking between people, right? So the key component of a conversation is what?
Back and forth.
Yeah, it's an interactive method, right? Okay? It's really kind of hard to have a conversation with just, one person and not come across as being crazy. Okay? But conversation's interactive. Would you describe a lecture as interactive?
Some of them.
Well, that's a good point. Not everybody, right? Not every professor that you get is okay and open to being interrupted in the middle of a lecture or being asked questions in the middle of a lecture. Can we agree? You ever get a teacher who's like, oh, just hold all questions till the end? Okay, that's fine. And it's those moments, it's those kind of lectures that most people will look at and go, of course it's not a conversation. How can it be a conversation? I can't interact with the professor while they're talking. Well, in a way, I get your point of view, but from a perspective, that's actually wrong. And I'll explain why. A lecture should always be interactive because there should be two things that are going on during a lecture. A lecture should never be a professor standing up here and telling you things. And that's the end of it. That's absorbing the information, by the way. All you're doing is listening. That's it. There's no interaction there. You're just absorbing the information. That's one-sided. The interaction comes with what you do with the information that's being told in class, that's being presented in class. If all you do is sit there and you, with your notes, try to dictate every word that the professor says, you're not really listening. If all you do is take notes and never question anything, never react to anything, never think about what is actually being presented, if you don't interact with the information, then all you're doing is just simply sitting there like a bump on a log and absorbing the content. The interaction comes with what you do with the information that's presented. And we'll talk about strategies to do that. But the first thing I want to point out How many people here, when you take notes, you do try to write down everything the professor is saying? A couple people.
Tried and failed.
Why did you fail?
I'm not listening. I'm just reading the words and.
Well, first off, how many people here think you can write fast enough to write everything that I say? Even with my voice at 60%. No. How many people can type fast enough to write down everything that I say? No. You're not court reporters. You guys ever seen a crime drama on TV? That poor person over there on the side who's just constantly typing on what looks like a little typewriter. Okay. By the way, court reporters, fascinating job if you ever want to get into it. They actually have specialized machines to allow them to type fast enough to be able to dictate every word that's being said in a courtroom. I guarantee you, your laptop keyboard ain't going to cut it. I don't care how fast you type. And I've seen how some people type in here, right? It's like, yeah, you ain't going to type fast enough to be able to dictate every word I'm saying. So the first thing that you want to do when you're taking notes, make sure you at least capture the main idea. So as we go through a lecture or we go through a presentation, it's usually broken up in many different parts. You want to make sure that you're getting those main ideas down. But here's the thing. Don't write down the main ideas exactly the way that I say them. Summarize them in your own words. Because if I were to ask each and every, and I'm sorry about my voice, but if I were to ask each and every one of you right now to write me a one-page essay, would your writing style match my speaking style? No. Wouldn't. The way that you think is not the way that I talk. Agreed? So why are you trying to make your notes the way that I speak? Seems weird now that I say it out loud. But how many times have you found yourself, when you're taking notes, doing exactly that? You're basically writing down exactly what somebody has told you, instead of writing down how you understand that information. Do you see the difference between the two? One technique, you're right, when you said you fail, when you try to write down everything, you're not really taking time to comprehend what you're hearing or what's being presented. All you're worried about is just trying to mimic and dictate exactly what's being said. Don't do that. Take in the information, take time to interact with the information, process it, and write down what you understand the information to be. That's good note-taking. Okay? Because now you've made it personalized. Anytime a professor gives you any sort of example, presents evidence, or even tells a story to try to connect information together, anecdotes. Have you ever been in a class where a teacher has tried to explain something through a story to try to connect the information? Okay? How many times in your notes have you written down that story exactly the way the professor has said it? Versus listening to the story, listening to the interaction, and then writing down in your notes how that interaction connects, how you understand that interaction to be. However, it is important. If we give examples or present evidence, it's important information. Got to make sure that you include those in your notes. Or how about this one? If the instructor repeats something, do you think it's important? If the instructor repeats something, do you think it's important? Yeah, it's important. Have you ever been in those classes where you just feel like the professor's just repeating themselves constantly? Right? Do you think it's just because we're on repeat? No. Do you think we just like hearing the sound of our voice? Most of us know. It's the reason why is because we are trying to make sure that you understand this is an important point. However, we may not, if we repeat ourselves, we may not say the same thing twice exactly the same way. We may change it up the second time around. Have you ever encountered that with a teacher? Have you ever wondered why? Why do we repeat ourselves, or why do we change up that same information? Why are we giving you the same information twice, and the second time we just changed it up the way that we said it? Why would we do that?
Some students learn differently.
Yeah. When we are talking to a class, right? We're looking at people's faces. We want to know who's paying attention, who's writing this down, who's sleeping, right? Who's texting in the back of the classroom. But more importantly, when we say something, did it land? Or do we have half the class looking at us like, what? Because I guarantee you, if it looks like what we just said didn't land with the class, you're going to hear it again, especially if it was an important information. But we may change it up because the first time we said it, I may have thought that was a brilliant way of saying it that way. Obviously, though, half the class didn't get it. So, let me change up. Let me say it differently. Let me state it a different way in hopes that it actually lands with more students. Do you see how that works? It's a lecture strategy. We are not trying to bore you. If you find yourself in a class and you feel like the entire time, it's like every time I go to the class, the professor's constantly repeating himself, don't feel like that's a negative. That's a positive for you, because guess what? Not only did you get it the second time, but you got it the first time too. That means you understand what's being taught in the class. So don't look at that as being a bad thing. Not everybody reacts to the information the same way. But react to the information you must. And this is what makes it interactive. When we give you a lesson, if we're presenting something on the board, presenting something here on the whiteboard or the projector or whatever it is that we are doing in class, don't just sit there and absorb the information. React to the information. And what I mean by that is that if you're in class and the professor says something that makes you question information that you have been given previously, or maybe makes you rethink something in an experience that you've had in the past or information that you've learned in the past, that's a good thing. React to it. Because what will end up happening is that it will lead to you having a question. That's where the interaction comes in. And what happens in the middle of a lecture if you've got a question? What should you do? Should you just try to make a point to go, oh yeah, that would be a good question, and then move on? What should you do? You should ask the question. However, what if you're in a class where you can't, questions till the end? Do you just try to remember the question? No. What should you do with the question? Write it down. Where? In your notes. Absolutely. Okay? 100%. Write down the question. Because once you have that question, if you try to remember it, how many times have you had this happen? Like you're sitting in class, something catches your attention, you have a question about it, but you can't ask. And you think to yourself, I'll just ask later. And then later comes and you totally forgot what the question is. Ever had that happen to you before? Yeah. Write down your questions so that you can ask them. So if you can't ask during class, when can you ask that question? After class. But what happens if the professor only has like 5 minutes to make it to his next class and he's got to run out of the door? And office hours are another good place. Absolutely. All right. But what if it's Friday and he doesn't have office hours until Monday? You're coming up on a weekend. What do you do then? Email. You guys got all the right answers on this one. This is good. Wonderful. But what if the professor's slow on answering emails and you need the answer right away? Text who? Yeah, we don't give out our text numbers. That's not going to happen. Not going to text. But, all right, so you can't ask during the lecture. For some reason, you can't ask after the lecture, during office hours, or expect a quick and timely response in email. What are you left with? Just throw up your hands and go, well, I guess I'm just never going to know the answer to that question.
The learning centers.
Learning your resources. Learning center. We have a library on campus, right? Or everybody's got Google in the palm of their hand. Not saying that if you search something on the internet, you're going to get the right answer. But you can do your own research. Or you can go to the resources that we have out here on campus to help you with the question. Do you see that? So, this is what makes a lecture interactive or a conversation. You should never enter into any class or a lecture class thinking that all you have to do, my whole responsibility is just to sit here and write notes. No. Or just, if you're an auditory learner, don't think that all you need to do is sit in the back, fold your arms, and just listen. Don't do that. Or if you want to record lectures, don't think I'm just going to come in, put down a tape recorder, and just sit there and record the lecture. No, no, no. It needs to be a conversation. It needs to be interactive. You need to write notes. You need to pay attention. You need to react to the information. If you have questions, you need to write down those questions. And then you have to review and follow up on those questions. Do you see the difference between expecting lectures to just be dictation versus conversation? All right. We'll hit this point and then we will go to a break. How many times do you feel like this person here on the right in class? You ever feel that way? Yeah. By the way, not a great way of being able to learn your topic material. I've tried osmosis. It does not work. But what happens if you can't pay attention in class? Well, your note-taking is going to stink. So how do you pay attention in class? Now, this class is not as long as some of my other classes. A lot of the other classes that I teach are 6 hours a week. So it's 3 hours twice a week. It's a long class. Okay, several breaks in that class. So what do you do when you're in a class that long? How do you stay alert? Well, one technique that you can do is, and by the way, ask the professor if this is okay, because not every classroom allows for food and drink. But if you can, bring snacks for the class. Not for the class, but to the class for you. Okay, I mean, if you want to bring donuts for everybody, I'm sure you could do that. But you get the idea, right? Bring some snacks. That can help a lot of people to try to keep alert during those things. Make sure you get rid of the distractions. So silence your phone. Excuse me. Here's one. We talked about this a little bit last week when we were talking about distractions around you. Remember I said, if you sit in the same place all the time and the people around you are constantly distracting you, get up and move, right? Sit in a different spot in the classroom next time. But the same thing, you better than I do. Some students feel like if they sit closer to the teacher, it makes them be on their best behavior. Like they will stay alert because they're really close to us. As though, I don't know, it's like some weird force field that's like halfway through the class that we can't possibly see the people in the back of the class doing the same thing. I don't know what it is, but some people feel like if they're close enough to the teacher, then suddenly they can actually pay attention and stay alert more. Okay? As though we can't pick up an eraser and fling it at somebody in the back of the room who's asleep. We can do that very easily. But if you know you and you need to sit up closer, do so. Another thing that you could do when you have a long session, say you go in 2 hours and you don't have a break for whatever reason, sit there and stretch and move if you need to. That doesn't mean get up and start wandering around the room, but if you need to get up and stretch, you're an adult. Do so. You're not chained to your desk. Okay? This will do two things. Number one, if you're just sitting there and you're stretching and you just kind of move, even just moving your shoulders a little bit is enough usually to kind of get the blood circulating a little bit. That will help keep you alert. The second thing is it's nonverbal communication to your instructor, telling us, hey, we need a break. Make sense? So, any questions about that? Because I think we need a break. All right, so let's take a couple of minutes, come back at 3:33. So we'll take about 5 minutes or so, and we'll wrap this up.
You already graded the goals in the scavenger hunt, right?
Yeah, those will be added this week.
I was looking at it over the weekend and it was like missing. I was like, wait a minute.
Well, it was one of the things I was talking about at the beginning of class.